harder to find customers. The types of housing people want and need will shift as well. In the U.S., the average home size has been increasing, but older people are less likely to want to live in huge houses. This could lead to a decline in housing demand in suburban neighborhoods with large, expensive homes, while retiree-friendly villages of smaller homes will spring up closer to transportation and shopping. Older populations are also increasingly likely to migrate to warmer climates, which will create population shifts in nations which have a variety of climates. If they don't plan ahead, however, local governments will be caught off guard as they either lose or gain residents. Many businesses and industries still rely heavily on young people for customers. Entertainment, for example, is geared largely to a very young demographic, with relatively few offerings geared to the older population. Businesses which fail to address the aging of the consumer population are likely to suffer in the coming decades. Many of the dire predictions about an aging world center around the need to provide health care for older people. As we have already discussed, however, the health of older generations is already improving and is likely to improve further because of lifestyle changes and advances in public health and medicine. Younger generations are also more willing to openly discuss and battle the conditions that often accompany aging. Nonetheless, the costs of health care for older adults will continue to be the single greatest expense for older people. Governments that pay for some or all of that care will be faced with difficult decisions as health care costs rise with the growing older population. Structural changes in health care systems and their funding may be needed. It would also be worthwhile to invest now in finding lower-cost alternatives for treating many of the diseases and chronic conditions that most commonly affect the elderly. Unfortunately, in some nations, there is likely to be a reduction in health care benefits, which may ultimately prove costly if it increases the dependence and decreases the productivity of older people. The aging of the world's population is almost invariably called a crisis, but there will be positive consequences as well. Crime is likely to decline since young people commit the majority of crimes. Will there be fewer wars? That may be too much to hope for, but with fewer young people and a greater need for them in the labor force, it will certainly make waging war a more self-destructive act. Older people tend to be more civic-minded. They are more likely to vote, and they follow news stories more closely than younger people, making them better informed citizens. Many volunteer in their communities and schools, providing services that would otherwise have to be paid for with tax dollars. The United Nations International Conference on Population and Development set forth the following objectives for our aging populations. to enhance self-reliance and promote quality of life and productive and independent living. To develop systems of health care services and economic and social security schemes, recognizing the special needs of women. And to develop formal and informal social support systems to enhance the ability of families to take care of older persons within the family. It will require a great deal of attention and hard work for nations to meet these objectives. The sooner we begin, the greater the likelihood of succeeding. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you, Dr. Jacobson. Those were some tremendous insights. And let's begin with the first question, and I'd really like to start with one today. And remember, we'd like to get as many questions in as we can. Therefore, we ask that you only ask one question at a time per phone call, and that your questions be as brief as possible. You may call the studio directly at the phone numbers or fax which appear on your screen. We remind you to make your calls a distance from the monitor to avoid feedback. First question I'm going to offer to you, Dr. Jacobson, and that is, how can we, those of us in business and those in education, better prepare our leaders to take advantage of the workforces that they have?
About 25 years ago, the idea, the concept of lifelong learning came about. And the way the changes are going, you need an update in your education about every 10 years to find out what's new and to be up to speed in dealing with the world as it changes. So a bachelor's degree is fine. 10 years later, you should pick up a master's degree, and then another 10 years later, pick up a PhD, and use the knowledge that you picked up at the university or in college in the workplace.
Is there a vocational equivalent versus the academic track? Are there vocational equivalents to needing to update your education?
There are. As you point out, we do have training, and there are different courses of conferences and so on that treat the subject in a small way, as opposed to a degree program.
Very, very focused. Let's go to our call now from the Estado de Sinaloa in Guamuchil, Sinaloa. And the question, please.
Yes. Beginning with the 1970s, we got the internet and all these other information technologies that have developed in the 80s and the 90s. And this has led to the information era, and it has connected all the firms and institutions. What are the plans for governments, do you think, that they should have in the developing countries as far as the macro and micro enterprise to guarantee that the adults can really adapt to the new changes and the new technologies? What do you think the role of the government should be to promote this updating?
It's a free-for-all question. The role of the government in making sure that the older generations can capitalize the new technology. Susan, why don't you come out of the blocks for us here?
I think the government plays a vital role, especially in developing countries where private businesses are not connecting large numbers of households. The government role will have to be both in building the infrastructure and in encouraging adults to take advantage of it, allaying their fears and getting them online as easily for them as possible.
Thanks, Susan.
I can only speak to that question from personal experience in the area of Chicago. The government, of course, owns and governs many institutions of higher learning in our area as well as others. I think the future educational arena for older people are what we in the United States at least call the junior college system, the community college system, where there are fantastic resources available in the field of what Dr. Jacobson calls lifelong learning. And we are doing that in our communities in Illinois, as I'm sure are being done elsewhere in the United States. concentrating on the needs of what we call older people who have to learn, I believe, separately in facilities where techniques are used that are applicable to their capabilities of learning, especially when it comes to technological and complicated subjects, which many people think older people can't learn, but they can. It's been demonstrated that they can, but they have to do it in facilities which I think government must fund, because they should not have to spend $20,000 or $30,000 to go back to school. This should be done at minimal cost, and that means government has to finance it.
Very good, very good. Thank you, Dr. Douglas. Let's go now to Sedopex in Santo Domingo with our next question.
Question we have is from the Dominican Republic. What measures can the organizations take in the developing world as far as aging, the expenses, and the availability of work for them? Jobs.
Susan?
That's a very difficult question to answer. I would like to say that there's a simple solution, but there's not. The expenses are real, and some developing nations will have difficulty coming up with the funds. But it is vital to do so, and I think that in one sense, by encouraging older workers to stay in the workforce, by building their skills, by doing the sorts of things we've been talking about, it will pay for itself in the long run through decreased expenses in other areas such as healthcare and retirement. So,
good. Thanks for those insights, Susan. We're now going to go to Brazil and take a question from the University of Pilatos in Rio Grande do Sul.
Good morning. Our question is for Susan. In your personal opinion, should the elders integrate the workforce or stay at home enjoying the life with their families?
Thank you for a wonderful question. My personal opinion is that the issue of whether or not older people should be able to retire is a real issue that must be addressed by societies. I think we owe them an opportunity to spend some portion of their final years not having to work, although they should be able to work if they choose to. So that's a question of social priority. Do we make sure the funds are there to make that possible, while at the same time encouraging and facilitating work among those who choose to do so? And that is my opinion on that issue.
And we like your opinion on those issues. But we're going to go now to the Polytechnic Institute in Santo Tomas in Mexico.
Good morning. Thank you very much. We have the following question. What are the main productive strategies in the least developed countries that can be implemented to benefit adults, older people, and also unemployed people?
Strategies in developing countries to benefit the older workers. Dr. Jacobson?
How can we make life easier for the older workers? That's in the developing countries, that would be plenty of water, houses, from there stimulate some sort of jobs and so forth. Do you have a thought, Susan?
Jobs and money are extremely important. And I think we in the United States have an obligation to work with you to do that. I think Americans who have in many ways been privileged to have had an economic boom and tremendous resources have a responsibility to work with countries all over the world. While your countries may be developing, so are we. We are sharing developmental ideas, and American resources and funds, I think, have to be made available to help you. But older people need money. It's as simple as that. It's a fallacy to assume that people can retire if they don't have the resources, which often means money and health, in order to be able to enjoy that retirement. And work is a wonderful way to do it, and I think we all have an obligation to set up the mechanism for doing that.
That mechanism is going to be critical in the future, and perhaps we'll get more into that. But we're going to take a question now from the Autonomous University in Chihuahua. And if we may have the question, please.
What do you think the insurance companies take as a stance now that people stay active much longer, till longer in life, until they're older?
That's a wonderful question. The impact from the insurance perspective, Dr. Douglas, because of the older workforce staying in longer.
Well, insurance companies do a lot more than just insure. Insurance companies, working with consultants in allied industries, have the responsibility of playing a preventive role as well as an insuring role. Insurance companies, of course, have to, using appropriate actuarial numbers, come up with methods for keeping people protected in various ways. What we call long-term insurance, therefore, becomes very important. It's an extraordinarily important socio-political fact that countries have to be concerned that people, as they get older, are given the security to know that if things don't work out right, if they're sick or they're unemployed, that they have adequate economic and physical protection. Insurance companies have a very big role to play in that, but insurance companies have to do more than just simply make money at it. They have to work in concert with the non-profit agencies of society to concentrate that everyone is given the benefits of society's fruits.
Very good. Thanks for those insights. We're going to go now to Los Michos, the university there in Sinaloa, please.
Good morning. Our question is, what can universities do in order to capitalize on their teachers and faculty that are over 65?
Susan, you interact with schools. Tell us how you feel about that.
Yes, I do. I think that, in fact, in many countries such as the U.S., it's a very important issue because the median age of the faculty is growing older. And one of the issues they face is that younger people tend to have newer information, sometimes fresher ideas, while older faculty have experience and a wealth of a lifetime of data to provide. So I think combining their skills in some measure might provide a terrific opportunity. Some people want to work part-time, for example, and having team teaching or having paired faculty, those sorts of things would provide both perspectives to students and would be incredibly valuable. But there are other things they could do as well with them, and I think Jake might want to address that as someone who started a university for older people.
Brief comment on that line.
Part-time teaching is terrific for the older instructor who has retired. It keeps him up to speed. He has to learn what's happening, incorporate that in his new teaching field, and he can certainly be used, and it's satisfying to him, and it's using a great resource.
And it keeps things moving. Very good. Thank you both. We're now going to take a question from the Technological University in Panama.
Greetings from the bridge of the world in the heart of the universe. Currently, Panama has increased the retirement age of healthcare professionals, educators, and others that had a special threshold, and even the age itself for the general public. What do you think about increasing the retirement age depending on the profession and the sector? And in order to establish these ages, what elements do you think should be considered in these kinds of works, jobs? And we're talking about especially the education sector and the health sector, which was the one that was increased.
Very good. Dr. Douglas, if we increase the retirement age?
The word retirement is coming up over and over again, and I don't like that word. It has implications that I think are negative, and I think every society should be aiming in the direction of making it possible for people to continue to produce and function and lead constructive lives as long as they want to and as long as they're capable of doing it. Governments, therefore, while considering politics and economics, have to structure societies in a way, or impact on societies in a way that allow people to continue to stay in the workforce as long as they are producing. And I think that's a universal given that applies to Panama and Mexico and the United States. And I would only like to emphasize the point that setting retirement ages is potentially a very destructive thing, and I think it has created a lot of problems in world society.
Thanks, Dr. Douglas. We're going to go now to a question from Sitmatel in La Habana, Cuba.
Good morning. Greetings to all of you. And my question is the following. Do you think that you can have an interrelation within a company without any confrontations, direct or indirect, because of lack of cooperation between and amongst them?
Amongst them, and I think them is probably the older and younger or different generational workers. And Susan, I'm going to come to you first, and we have just a couple of minutes left here. But
one of the things that I do is I talk to companies and to professional groups about managing generational conflict in the workplace. It is difficult to completely avoid it. You will likely have some conflicts as younger generations move in and want to do things differently and older generations don't. You must address that. Businesses, organizations have to meet that challenge head on and not pretend it's not happening. It will happen, but it can be eased. It can be made better, and the generations can be made to understand each other better. And then you have a more cohesive and better workforce. So it's a plus in that sense.
Brief follow-up, Dr. Douglas.
Focus groups. We, in our consulting relationship with companies, help them to set up focus groups where intergenerational issues are brought to the fore, where younger and older workers talk with each other, if necessary, argue with each other, get the issues out into the open, and allow each other to understand each other's perspectives.
Very good. Good. Thank you both. And we thank you for your questions. They were tremendous questions, and we've got some tremendous insights from our panel. Let's now begin with Module 2, in which Dr. Douglas tells how to structure our workplaces to prepare for an aging workforce.
Thank you. To a 75-year-old older worker like me, it's not always easy to answer the question I have posed as the title of my presentation, The Older Worker, Boon or Bust to the Global Economy. I would like to think that I am age insensitive, but that isn't true. Since semi-retiring from the practice of oral and maxillofacial surgery 10 years ago, and spending a few years as a volunteer with the American Association of Retired Persons, I have been busier than at any previous time in my life. I earn a salary as a consultant for Marsh Risk Consulting, the largest global professional services firm in the world, where my primary responsibility is to conduct a business development program on the subject of the changing workforce. In the other portion of my life, I continue to play out a long-time academic role where I am now clinical professor of environmental and Occupational Health at the University of Illinois School of Public Health. While I like to think of myself as an older worker advocate, in truth, I have become a conservative and focused, corporate-oriented workplace health consultant who now finds himself viewing older workers from a more objective perspective, even though I am one myself. To me, the older worker, no matter whether he is 50, 60, or 70, should be up to the responsibilities of his job. He should be productive, he should be at work on a regular basis, and he should fit into his role in the workplace as an age-neutral contributor. On the other hand, the employer, conscious of the fact that his workforce is aging, should be adjusting his work environment, his hiring and retention policies, and his short and long-term goals to the realities of his aging workforce. Those realities include some very firm positives as well as some negatives. To me, it's a given that the older worker, by definition, is more experienced. Therefore, he or she should be more mature. With maturity, hopefully, comes some degree of wisdom, as well as human and emotional competency. In a world that has grown smaller as a result of technological advances, these attributes are crucial to working in multicultural and global environments. Let me start by discussing some of the problems wrought by global aging from the perspective of the world business community. The fact that larger numbers of people are living longer lives is a blessing from a social and communal point of view. However, human resource and risk managers often view that same older person as a carrier of undesirable baggage when he or she remains on in the workforce. An HR director from a large Midwestern steel company recently went so far as to refer to his aging workforce as a necessary evil. An important part of my job is to help that type of person to see the positive sides of his older workers, especially since the day is rapidly approaching in many industries and businesses when there will be a dearth of younger workers, and older workers will become an indispensable part of the workforce. In certain environments, and the workplace is one of them, there tend to be inbuilt prejudices against older people. While it will take time for this rather sudden chronological shift in the workforce to sink into the mentality of some managers, in reality, they have no choice. Until only recently, older workers were expected to exit the workforce at around age 50. Unions and other worker advocates promoted early retirement, since pensions and other retirement benefits were goals that older workers look forward to from the time of their earlier working years. Now, all of a sudden, they are either being asked to stay on because they are needed, or for personal financial reasons find that they have no choice but to do so. Recent statistics indicate that the workers in today's older worker generation on average will be staying at work for 5 or more years longer than their parents before them. Research for years has shown that most people don't like their jobs, so it's unrealistic to assume that these same people will relish the idea of remaining at work. For that reason, employers are finding that they are in a buyer's market, and radical changes are in the making to make the workplace more attractive to these same older workers. to encourage older workers to stay on and to be productive at the same time is not